Scorpio, listen closely, because what I'm about to say is something your soul has been whispering for a long time, but no one ever gave you the words for it. You haven't been imagining the distance. You haven't been too sensitive. You haven't become cold or ungrateful. That strange ache you feel when you're sitting in the same room with your family, smiling, nodding, playing your role, while deep inside you feel like a stranger in your own story. That is not rejection. That is God quietly, gently but firmly pulling you out of a space that can no longer hold the person you are becoming. The disconnection you feel is not a punishment. It's a holy pause, a divine redirection, a slow and sacred rearranging of your life so that your peace can finally breathe again. You may not fully understand it yet, but there is a reason your spirit no longer fits in the old familiar rooms, and that reason is not that you're broken. It's that you've outgrown them. There was a time when you thought belonging meant staying close, obeying the rules, playing the part, carrying the weight, keeping the secrets. You learned that love looked like silence, like swallowing your truth to keep the peace, like shrinking yourself to make other people comfortable. Maybe you were the one who held everything together when emotions exploded and no one else wanted to acknowledge the tension. Maybe you were the child who could feel the storm in the room before a single word was spoken. Maybe you were the one who knew where the pain was hiding, even when everyone else insisted everything was fine. You didn't choose that role, Scorpio. You were drafted into it long before you knew you had a choice, and now that choice is arriving. That's why it hurts so much. That's why your chest feels tight after family gatherings. That's why you leave feeling drained, confused, guilty, and yet strangely relieved when you're finally alone again. Your soul is trying to step into a different chapter, and the script your family handed you no longer matches what God is whispering in your heart. For some of you, this distance has shown up like constant misunderstanding. You speak from your depth, but they hear disrespect. You set a boundary, and they call it ingratitude. You say you're tired, and suddenly you're dramatic, ungrateful, or making everything about yourself. It's like you're speaking one language and they're hearing another, as if your soul has moved into a different frequency and they're still tuned to the old channel. You start to wonder, am I the problem? Am I asking for too much? Am I the one who's wrong? But deep down, there is a quiet, stubborn knowing that refuses to die. I was made for more than this constant emotional suffocation. I was made for honest love, not love that only exists when I'm playing a role that doesn't belong to me. You may not have the words to describe it, but your body knows. Your nervous system knows. Your tears at night know. Your silence after the arguments knows. The distance is not proof that you are unlovable. It is proof that your soul no longer agrees to be molded by patterns that keep you small. For others, the distance has arrived more quietly. No big explosions, no dramatic confrontations, just a slow fading. Phone calls that feel more like obligation than connection. Conversations that never go beyond the surface. Jokes that skim over your pain as if it's something to dismiss, not something to hold. You share a win and they downplay it. You share a dream and they change the subject. You share a wound and they tell you why you're overreacting. Slowly, without even choosing it, you start sharing less. You learn to keep the deepest parts of your heart behind a locked door because you've learned that not everyone knows how to handle what's sacred. And here's the truth your spirit is trying to show you. It's not that you are too deep, it's that not everyone is willing to swim. God is not separating you from your family because they are villains and you are a saint. It's more subtle than that. God is creating space so that the next stage of your healing and calling is not constantly watered down by environments that can't understand it. Scorpio, you are a sign of transformation, of death and rebirth, of the phoenix rising from ashes. Your path is not one of staying the same so that other people never feel uncomfortable. Your path is one of evolution, of breaking patterns that have been passed down for generations, of saying that the pain stops with me. That's not something everyone will applaud. Some will misinterpret your growth as rebellion. Some will take your boundaries as insults. Some will resent the way you are no longer willing to carry what they never healed in themselves. They may say things like, "You've changed," as if that's a bad thing, when in reality, that sentence is the most accurate compliment your soul could receive. You have changed. You've stopped confusing guilt with love. You've stopped equating suffering with loyalty. You've stopped believing that breaking yourself is the only way to keep the family from breaking apart. And that shift will scare people who are used to borrowing your strength without ever offering their own. There is a sacred kind of loneliness that comes when God starts to restore your peace. It's the loneliness of stepping out of the old room before the new one has fully opened. You feel caught between two worlds, the version of you they still see, and the version of you God is patiently unfolding. You may find yourself crying without knowing exactly why. You may feel waves of grief for a closeness you never truly had, but always secretly hoped for. You may look at other families and think, "Why can't mine be like that?" Let yourself grieve that. Let yourself mourn the fantasy of what never was. That grief is not weakness. It is healing. It is the deep recognition that your heart wanted to be met at a depth your family didn't know how to offer. And instead of hating them for that, you're being invited to release them from the responsibility of being something they were never taught to be. You're not walking away from love. You're walking away from the illusion that love and constant self-betrayal are the same thing. This distance is not permanent exile. It doesn't mean you must slam every door, burn every bridge, and declare yourself an orphan of your own bloodline. Sometimes the separation is physical, moving out, moving away, choosing not to attend every gathering, reducing contact for a season. Sometimes the separation is purely internal, sitting at the same table, but choosing not to internalize the same scripts, hearing the old accusations, but refusing to believe them, listening to the same stories, but no longer allowing them to define you. Whether your separation is outer or inner, the purpose is restoration, not of the family's comfort, but of your peace. You are allowed to love your family and still say, "This behavior is not okay for me." You are allowed to care deeply and still say, "I need space." You are allowed to be grateful for what they gave you and still admit, "I need to grow beyond what this environment can offer." This is not betrayal. This is spiritual adulthood. Think about how much of your identity was shaped around what your family needed, not who you really are. Maybe you were the peacemaker, always smoothing over conflict. Maybe you were the strong one, never allowed to break down. Maybe you were the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who watched everything and said nothing. Maybe you were the golden child whose successes were used to decorate the family's image while your private struggles were dismissed or minimized. Or maybe you were the scapegoat, the one who carried the blame so others didn't have to look at their own reflection. These roles feel like love at first because they keep you connected, useful, needed. But over time they begin to suffocate you. They become cages disguised as identities. And when your soul has had enough, when your spirit finally says no more, God begins to gently loosen the hinges on those cages. Conversations start to feel heavier. Silence becomes unbearable. You no longer find comfort in pretending. That discomfort is not your enemy. It is your liberation beginning to move. As this process unfolds, you might notice that your body speaks before your mind does. You feel anxiety before visits. You feel drained after phone calls. You feel tension in your chest, a knot in your stomach, a headache that appears out of nowhere. Pay attention to that. Your body has been taking notes long before your consciousness had the courage to read them. God often speaks through the body when the mind is still trying to rationalize everything away. When the thought, "I need space," feels too scary to think, your body says it for you through exhaustion, through tears, through that deep, unshakable fatigue in your soul. The more you listen to that wisdom and honor it, not with impulsive decisions, but with honest reflection and gentle boundaries, the more your peace starts to return. You begin to breathe differently. You begin to sleep better. You begin to discover who you are when you are not constantly performing. And here's something else you need to know. Distance does not erase love. You can step back from daily involvement and still hold your family in your prayers. You can limit conversations and still wish them healing. You can say no to their patterns and still say yes to compassion. Real love does not demand your self-erasure. Real love does not require you to sit quietly inside a burning house just to prove you care. Sometimes real love looks like stepping out of the fire first, so you can one day come back with water instead of ashes. Your journey of healing might one day become the mirror that shows them there is another way to live, another way to love, another way to be family. But that possibility cannot breathe if you stay buried under the same expectations that nearly suffocated you. You may feel guilty when you first start to choose yourself. That guilt will sound like, I'm abandoning them. I'm ungrateful. I'm selfish. Maybe I'm the problem. But understand this, guilt and love are not the same thing. Guilt is often the voice of old programming, installed in you by generations of people who were too afraid to disappoint anyone. Love is the voice that says, I want you to be whole, even if I don't fully understand your choices. You may not hear that kind of love from your family yet, but you can begin to speak it to yourself. Each time you choose peace over chaos, honesty over pretending, authenticity over performance, you're blessing not only your future, but the line of souls that came before you who didn't have the tools or courage to do what you are doing now. You're not breaking the family. You're breaking the pattern. Slowly, as you move through this season, something beautiful begins to happen. You start to attract a different kind of connection. People who see you without needing you to shrink. People who listen without turning your pain into a competition. People who can hold space for your depth without calling it drama. This is soul family. They may arrive as friends, mentors, partners, spiritual communities, or even quiet strangers whose words awaken something gentle inside you. With them, you don't have to earn your place by suffering. You don't have to hold the house together by yourself. You don't have to hide the parts of you that are too much for others. These are the rooms God is guiding you toward. Rooms where your sensitivity is a gift, not a weakness. Where your intuition is respected, not mocked. Where your boundaries are seen as healthy, not as betrayal. You won't find them overnight. But each time you honor your truth, you're moving closer to them step by step. In the middle of all this, remember, this message is not commanding you to cut ties, fight, or make drastic decisions. It is an invitation to listen more deeply to your own soul, to your own intuition, to your own relationship with the divine. Every family story is different. Every heart is different. What is right for another person may not be right for you. This narrative is a mirror, not a law, one possible way of understanding what you're feeling, not a rule book you must follow. If it resonates, let it comfort and clarify you. If it does not, let it pass like a cloud across your inner sky. No video, no voice, no reading can replace your own inner wisdom or the practical guidance of professionals, counselors, or spiritual leaders you trust. These words are here to sit beside you for a moment, not to control your choices. You are, and always will be, the final author of your story. So, Scorpio, as you stand in this in-between space, no longer fully at home in the old dynamics, not yet fully anchored in the new, take a breath. Place a hand over your heart. Feel how long it's been beating for you, even in rooms where you felt invisible. Feel how faithfully it has carried you through conflict, confusion, and quiet suffering. And understand this, God is not tearing your life apart. God is rearranging it so that peace is no longer the last thing you receive, but the first thing you stand upon. You are not being abandoned. You are being guided. You are not being cut off. You are being set apart. Set apart for clarity, for healing, for relationships that do not ask you to disappear in order to stay. You may walk alone for a while, but you will not walk abandoned. Heaven walks with you into every new boundary, every honest conversation, every small step away from chaos and toward calm. One day, you will look back at this season and recognize it as the turning point. Not when everything fell apart, but when everything that was false could no longer hold. You will remember the nights you cried, the days you questioned yourself, the moments you almost went back just to stop feeling guilty, and you will be grateful that you didn't, grateful that you stayed with your truth, grateful that you honored the quiet instructions of your soul, grateful that you chose peace, even when peace meant distance. You are not the villain for wanting to be whole. You are not unloving for wanting to breathe. You are not wrong for hearing a call your family doesn't yet understand. This family distance is not rejection, Scorpio. It is God, in the most mysterious and merciful way, restoring your peace.